Good evening from Indonesia, everyone. We are grateful to welcome every one of you to our online memorial for the late Professor Enrique Dussel, our esteemed theologian who passed away last Sunday, November the 5th, at the age of 88. As we know it, he's a prominent critical thinker and a theologian, philosopher, historian, a professor who left a profound legacy in the world of philosophy and ethics. And amidst of our condolences, we aim to reflect on Professor Dussel's life and work and the profound impact he had on us individually and as a society. So observing the diverse backgrounds of our speaker today, I think we can agree that it is evident that Professor Dussel's influence transcends the confines of academia and societal norms. So our esteemed speakers, representing various disciplines such as philosophy, sociology, psychoanalysis, religious studies, and theology, have come together to pay tribute to this remarkable legacy. To be more precise, I'd like to invite Professor Prasenjit Biswas to welcome you on behalf of the Global Forum of Transcritique. He will help setting the expectations of this discussion tonight, exploring the areas that we've seen through the life and work of Professor Dussel and the aspirations that his work has helped bring to fruition in our society. So everyone, please welcome Professor Biswas. So apologies in advance for everyone because of these technical difficulties that are emerging. It looks like Professor Biswas is unable to deliver the opening speech, but then we need to continue anyway. I'll introduce you shortly the presenters for our tonight's discussion. As you can see on the screen, we have here Professor Luis Martínez Andrade. Thank you so much for accepting our invitations. He's a professor and a sociologist from this university in Louvain. And as the second speaker, we have Ms. Carmen. Thank you so much for coming. She's a researcher from Martin Luther University in Germany. And then we have Professor Muniz, who is still on his way because of some technical difficulties as well. He's a professor in the Lacanian psychoanalysis from Brazil. And then we have Mr. Ferry Hidayat, who's a researcher in Gadjah University in Indonesia. And then finally, we have Professor Prasenjit Biswas from Department of Philosophy in India. So without further ado, I'll invite Reverend Heber to introduce our first speaker and then welcome him.
Our first speaker, Professor Luis Martínez Andrade, is a Mexican essayist with a PhD in sociology from EHESS in Paris. In 2009, he received the internationally acclaimed Thinking Against the Mainstream Essay Award in Havana. He is the author of Religion Without Redemption, Social Contradiction, and Awakened Dreams in Latin America, and Decolonizing Liberation Theologies.
Hello, everybody. First of all, I want to thanks to Professor Prasenjit Biswas for organize this tribute to Enrique Dussel. No, for us, the deed of Enrique Dussel is a deeply drastic loss, not only for the not Eurocentrical Marxism, but also for the critical thinking in the not only Latin America, globally. Well, Enrique Dussel was not only the founder of the philosophy of liberation, but one of the most important thinkers of the second half of 20th century. In a recent book entitled Enrique Dussel y la crítica de la modernidad, the philosopher Abdiel Rodríguez analyzed both the intellectual trajectory of philosopher Enrique Dussel and his main concepts and categories as transmodernity, totality, exteriority, analytical method, among others, with the aim of exposing the ethical political stance of the founder of philosophy of liberation. Abdiel Rodríguez noted that starting in the 19th, Argentine-Mexican philosopher Enrique Dussel established a dialogue with Aníbal Quijano and with the idea of coloniality of power, Walter Mignolo, with this notion of imperial difference and colonial difference, and of course, Immanuel Wallerstein, for articulate the relationship between the myth of modernity, the emergence of ego conquiro, I conquest, and the development of both capitalism and coloniality of power, knowledge. Consequently, one of the contributions of the philosophy of liberation to the decolonial term lies in this approach, the origin of myth of modernity, that is in the moment in which Europe opens toward the Atlantic and configuring a new ontology of domination on a planetary scale. I usually say that for the colonial term, the philosophy of liberation book by Dussel is similar, play a role similar to the Orientalist by Edward Said for the post-colonial or cultural studies. And we have to say that the book was published in the 17th. We cannot forget that the first edition of the Orientalist was published in 78, and the Philosophy of Liberation was published in 75. Well, since the publication of Philosophy of Liberation in 1976, Enrique Dussel argued that the bodily negative, the victims, and the locus enunciatis of the decolonizing discourse for liberation. In this sense, the category of exteriority is the most important in the philosophy of liberation, since it is the start from the radically others, that is, from the subject of people denied by Western modernity. We cannot forget that the idea of exteriority, Dussel was thinking on Emmanuel Levinas. Hence, the logic of exteriority or otherness is analectical. In this regard, Eduardo Restrepo and Axel Rojas mention that the maximum criticism derives from the exteriority of the system, analectical moment, go for beyond of the negative dialectical or ontological method of totality. We need to remember that, of course, Levinas criticized the idea of totality in the Heideggerian system, but for Dussel, it's important to think from the non-person. You remember this idea of the Le Damné de la Terre proposed by Franz Fanon, this idea from not being. Unlike the Hegelian dialectic, the philosophy of liberation proposed by Enrique Dussel starts from the exteriority of the radically other. This irruption can be perceived in the process of liberation or in the moment of rebellion of the victim. It is not simply a process of recognition, no? So, fashion in the Eurocentrical critical theory, but an analectical moment of subjects and community that had been denied by modernity, coloniality. During 18th, those working in the field of subaltern studies revisited Gramscian contribution to historical and cultural analysis. Specifically, Ranahait Guha wrote on the temporal and discursive reduction of term or class. Class and subaltern groups continue to struggle against capitalist ideology from the theoretical trish position in the periphery, the post-colonial proposal. In another point of the periphery, Latin America, the philosophy of liberation, inspired by the theology of liberation, will construct a narrative from the outside of the hegemonic system. The brutal dictatorship of Latin America, supported by the international organizations such as International Monetary Fund or the World Bank, act as puppet of the neoliberal project. Under the doctrine of national security, the philosophy of liberation suffered exile, persecution, and censure. Without renouncing social transformation and political struggle, philosophy of liberation has proposed a project since 17th, which was ethical, cultural, epistemic, political, economic, etc., based on principle and practical discursive mediation, which human life, community, and condition to sustain this. The cry of the poor and the hurt is central in such an epistemic and political architecture. Liberation philosophy has assimilated theoretical contribution of Western European, Arab, Muslim, Chinese, Sub-Saharan African, and other thought established both South-North and North-South dialogue in the critical current of said geo-epistemic latitude. We cannot forget that Enrique Dussel and philosophy of liberation was not established a dialogue with Habermas or Apple, but of course with, for example, Ebosi Bulaga, this African thinker, or with another important thinkers. Enrique Dussel maintains that philosophy of liberation was a spin-off in the 17th of the treatment of two problems. On the one hand, the situation of poverty affecting a large part of humanity. On another hand, environmental degradation. That is important in the first case, because you remember when Dussel underlined that the second generation of critical theory forgot.
I'll call you back around 11, post 11.
Forget the negative materiality. And now, I think something has the open micro. Well, I continue. Ethics of liberation in the age of globalization. It has been more than 20 years that philosopher Enrique Dussel published Ethics of Liberation in the Age of Globalization in Spanish, already telling us in the English version about how contemporary critical thinking is a touchstone. The importance of this work lies, in one hand, in how it demonstrates the force of philosophical thought which reproduces itself in the periphery of the world system, and on the other hand, in how it poses questions which are theoretical, ethical, and political in nature and radically important for humanity in the third millennium. In this sense, this book questions the hegemonic ethics that postulate the save who you can, capitalist ideology, and even justify social Darwinism. We have before us a work that from the introduction confronts the hegemonic vision of history as not part of Hellenic world, but North African and Middle East, in order to relativize the role of Europe in the formation of global culture. One should be noted that the above historical description has the backdrop of a philosophical intention, since it calls into question the myth of modernity, the ideology of progress, and alleged Western superiority. In the first part, Foundation of Ethics, Enrique Dussel states the three primary principles or moments to describe purpose in architectural framework of categories of analysis. First, the material principle, which touches upon suffering corporeality, derives from negative experience from the victim. Second, formal principle of morality, which refers the application of truth validity norm, and furthermore, most value retakes from the discourse ethics proposed by Karl Otto Appel. In this sense, a fruitful dialogue maintains itself to complement the material principle. Lastly, the principle of feasibility, which focuses upon that context or environment consequently which what is factually possible in derby by instrumental role of reason is not misplaced through precisely subsumed to a single objective, the reproduction and development of human life. In the second part, critics, ethics, anti-hegemonic validity, and the praxis of liberation, Enrique Dussel appoints the other three principles who configure the ethics of liberation, ethical critical principle. Following the reflection of Karl Marx, because sometimes we forgot that Enrique Dussel read from Levisian perspective and proposed an interesting lecture from Marx. No, he published among 4 books in Spanish. Unfortunately, I think one translate to English. But in 19th, he wrote to present us a new reading from Karl Marx. Dussel postulates the creation of a new ethical system based upon an universal liberation rationality, which has reference point to the alterity and exteriority of the victim. Following the thinking of Marxist philosopher Ernest Bloch, Dussel rehabilitated the role of utopia in ethical and social projects. A liberation principle is the moment where the victim rise themselves to the radical transformation of the system. Or, in other words, to leave the situation of material negativity in which they find themselves. In this regard, Dussel addressed a precluded subject for contemporary political philosophy, which is that the violence. This topic about violence was reflecting even for the liberation theologian in the 17th and 18th. Finally, the validity of and the coherence of the ethical material proposed by Dussel reveals itself obviously, since it takes as a starting point the pain of corporeality or bodily reality of the victim. In this sense, we maintain that ethics of liberation marks an important point not only in the trajectory of Argentinian philosopher, but also in the development of the history of contemporary thought. On another hand, Dussel has linked the logic of capitalism and the dynamic of colonialism with the epiphany of modernity. To him, modernity is an historic and cultural process that finds its beginning in the discovery of America, that hiding the other, and a starting point in the conquest. The ego conquiro, I conquest of Hispanic Lusitanian power, created a society where the non-white person will be objectified as an object of production. Nevertheless, in this process of colonization, there was not absent of clergy who harshly criticized the method of submission and domination. Enrique Dussel maintains that the modern politics are founded in the pragmatic domination that the Hispanic and Lusitanian conquistadors employed in 16th century. The ego conquiro will, after a century, become the Cartesian ego cogito, determine the classic definition of modern political philosophy. What this definition is was conceived power as a synonym of domination. However, Enrique Dussel suggests that the social movements needs a different theoretical framework made of other categories and concepts, so that they are available to articulate their demand with an anti-hegemonic political horizon. Yes, well, for conclusion, the transmodernity that Dussel proposed implies the convergence of the groups that are found outside of totality, indigenous in the colonial framework, women in the patriarchal context, Black people in the racial field, and the poor and the capitalist system, etc., in a counter-hegemonic project that can include the victim of modernity. The reason as an instrument of liberation should be not underestimated. Instead, it should be exercised as a discourse strategy that causes the last harm, or in other words, it should exclude the last possible number. The philosophy of liberation that Dussel cultivate since 17th was founded in a discursive ethics that openly confront the proposal of the center. For example, those of Apple and Habermas, because he considers them to be charged with a metaphysical individualism that make them fall in a reductionist formalism. Dussel begin with the suffering body, corporalidad sufriente, of those excluded by the current system, and maintains that the human rights cannot be postulated a priori as those natural law. Instead, human rights are a result of a specific historic process, and in this sense should be created a posteriori. Through critical political consensus on the whole of the groups without rights and a struggle, a state of rebellion for their recognition, it will be possible to see a state of law that is more democratic. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for setting the tone of the conversation, Professor Luis. And as we're moving forward, I think your presentation resonates a lot with other presenters as well. You can see Ms. Carmen. I think it's time for you to deliver your presentation as a second speaker, but I'd like to invite Reverend Heber to introduce her first.
Thank you, Mr. Daniel. Carmen Irene González hails from San Salvador. Her academic journey includes a BA in German language and literature, a professional linguistic from Martin Luther University, and MA, Master of Arts in Comparative Literature from the same university. She has taught as a lecturer at the Institute of Roman Studies and worked as a research assistant at the Institute for Roman Studies at Martin Luther University. Carmen specialized in Latin American literature, theories of literary studies, decentralized epistemologies, decoloniality, and feminisms. Her work has been featured in articles such as the Chronicles of El Faro, Nuevas Perspectivas Subalternas, and Approaching the Violent Stranger. She also co-edited Literature in a Globalized Context, 11th International Colloquium in Romance and Comparative Literature. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the generous introduction, which I actually don't want to put in the foreground. I am really happy to be here to share with you the dwelling of the passing of Enrique Dussel. I want to thank you for the invitation and for the organization of this important and solemn event, to think about Dussel's work and to remember his very much appreciated and important publications and theories. So thank you for including me in this panel. I have been working on the theories of Enrique Dussel. And first and foremost, I want to express my most felt condolences to his family, friends, and colleagues. I didn't have the pleasure to meet him in person, so I will refrain to talk about his work. But I want also to take a minute and acknowledge the loss, as the previous colleague said, to acknowledge the loss of a person that has had a fundamental meaning, not only for Latin American philosophy, but for the theory in general and for the humanities worldwide. Enrique Dussel has been known foremost and mainly for his work on the philosophy of liberation. We heard a colleague before me, and I want to talk today about some aspect of his work that reaches beyond philosophy, so as to, or with the intention to honor his work. I am a person trained within the field of comparative literature and have read Dussel with great pleasure for his attention to semiotics and for the great relevance he ascribes to thinking about another theory of knowledge. This is one of the things that amazes me the most about his body of work. The linkage he proposes between analogy and faith, the intention of recovering faith as a valid epistemological dimension. And with the publication of Philosophy of Liberation, a new theory of knowledge is being pursued. So this is actual a turn in epistemology we're encountering with Dussel. I personally first encountered his work within the framework of the theory of decoloniality and the group modernity coloniality. And this was my first approach to the work of Dussel, but I think his work goes beyond decoloniality, and this group could not have been able to predict how far the decoloniality principle will be linked to Enrique Dussel's groundwork in philosophy of liberation. So I want to talk shortly about Dussel's publication last monographical publication in 2020, 7 ensayos de filosofía de la liberación hacia una fundamentación del giro decolonial. In English, 7 essays on philosophy of liberation towards a foundation of the decolonial turn, because I think it's one really big approach in actuality to talk about the fundamental importance that philosophy of liberation has for any decolonial work. And in the publication, 7 essays on philosophy of liberation, Dussel reinstates the weight of the philosophy of liberation for the actual debates on the colonial thinking and of critical theories and alterity discourse, something my colleague was also talking about. The epistemic foundation contained in this publication follows Dussel's work from his preliminary examination of Semitic ethics. He has a huge body of work on Semitic ethics via the geopolitical context of Latin American liberation philosophy and liberation theology, and onto his critique of the Frankfurt School and the New Frankfurt School also. His critique of this being an Eurocentric critical theory, and this publication culminates in the theoretical formulation of his decolonial term of transmodernity and the repercussions of his reading of Marx for further decolonial theory enterprises. One pending work of his is what concerns the aesthetic of liberation. I think this is something that he was still talking about in the last years of his work. Dussel's theory range is indeed extremely vast, as we already heard, and goes beyond any disciplinary boundaries. In that sense, I want to highlight today the epistemological value his work has for every discipline trying to understand the problems that the atrocities of modernity carries. Dussel's legacy could not be more relevant in today's world, where capitalism represents the primary form of dealing with each other, and where war and violence is the main form of communication between nations. Dussel's analysis on geopolitics and war play also a big role in his known publication of philosophy of liberation, where he sees war and violence as the origin of the established system within we're living in right now. So this is the preface preluding his philosophy of liberation. But nevertheless, his philosophy of liberation contains the hope for a better world, for a more just world in the form of another human interaction. I want to call your attention today to the importance of Dussel's theory of an other notion of epistemology, an other form of learning, an other mode of relating to the world and to each other. Enrique Dussel shows the urgent need of a theory that deals with the established dialectic because of its insufficient performance when encountering the other, the marginal, the peripheral subjectivities. His notion of analectica is determined by the affirmation of the life of the other, in its plenitude and dignity, recognizing the mode of life of the other in a metaphysical exteriority. The colleague also talked a little bit about this, and this metaphysical exteriority can only be revealed by an epiphany, recuperating in this way the importance of faith for the epistemological discourse, because of course, we heard already the influence that Levinas had on Dussel's work, but I think I want to highlight the Dussel's own intention in seeing faith as a main player in the epistemological discourse. Analectica is defined by means of the dimensions of faith. So analectica is the logic Dussel will present us for his philosophy of liberation. And analectica is conceived in the so-called analogia fidei, that is analogy of faith, comparison through faith or reaching through faith. It refers to a metaphysical experience derived from the Hebrew panim panim, also present in Levinas. This metaphysical experience corresponds to the encounter between the face of a human being and the face of another human being, and is considered the origin of a dialogue and thus precedes it. So it's not only exteriority, what was already being explained by my colleague before me, but is first and foremost proximity, which Dussel will reinstate. According to Dussel, the analogia fidei is more complex than other types of analogies. So I would like to read one passage of Dussel's work so as to commemorate him. I would like to read it in Spanish, but I would put the translation on the chat so you can maybe read with me. It's a little bit long, so please bear with me. Okay. So here he's describing his method, and I think it says so much about his intention and his work. Analéctico quiere indicar el hecho real humano por el que todo hombre, todo grupo o pueblo se sitúa siempre más allá, ano, del horizonte de la totalidad. Dicha exterioridad debe afirmársela primeramente, ya que la dialéctica negativa no es suficiente. El momento analéctico es el punto de apoyo de nuevos despliegues. El momento analéctico nos abre el ámbito metafísico, que no es el óntico de las ciencias fácticas ni el óntico de la dialéctica negativa. Refiriéndose semánticamente al otro, su categoría propia es la de exterioridad. Por ello, el punto de partida de su discurso metódico es la exterioridad del otro. Su principio no es el de identidad, sino el de separación, distinción. El momento analéctico del método dialéctico positivo o metafísico sigue una secuencia propia ya descrita en cierta manera en el proceso de la revelación y comunicación en la proximidad. El momento analéctico es afirmación de la exterioridad, no es solo negación de la negación del sistema desde la afirmación de la totalidad, es superación de la totalidad, pero no solo como actualidad de lo que está en potencia en el sistema. Afirmar la exterioridad es realizar lo imposible para el sistema, es realizar lo nuevo, lo imprevisible para la totalidad. Lo que surge desde la libertad incondicionada, revolucionaria, innovadora, es negación de la negación desde la afirmación de la totalidad. So, since I don't want to take up too much time, I think I just want to sum up in my intention to remember this clear task that Dussel is inscribing in this method of analectica, and to highlight the importance that this means for searching for a theory of knowledge that can possibilitate within humanities, not only philosophy, but within humanities, to search for a more just world. Okay, thank you very much, and I am ready.
Thank you so much, Ms. Carmen. We do appreciate the major shift that you provide from Theological Foundation that we are moving forward towards a more personal touch, in which you talk about the epistemological framework offered by Dussel, only made possible by the epiphany. I mean, it is something that is really interesting that I believe will raise some questions later on in the Q&A section. Thank you so much, and I can see that Professor Muniz is here. Professor, can you hear us? Professor Muniz?
Muniz. Am I?
Yeah.
Me? Okay.
Yeah, so
Okay, I listen.
I apologize for the inconveniences. So before we move forward to the presentation of Professor Muniz, let me invite Reverend Heber to introduce Professor Muniz properly.
Thank you, Mr. Daniel. Professor Marcelo Muniz Freire has made valuable contributions to the field through his notable bibliographic productions, including works such as The Psychotic Writing, 2001, The Lacanian Structure of Psychosis, 2002, Psychoanalysis and the Constructions, 1998, and The Perverse Structure and its Manifestations in Literature, 2004. Additionally, his contributions include Psychoanalysis and Neuroscience, Freudian Metapsychology Revisited, 2004, and The Obliterations of the Subjects, Impacts of the Social Inflections of Subjectivity, 2004, among others. His research has covered a wide array of topics such as the integrations of resources in the treatment of psychosis, paraconsistent logic, and psychoanalysis, and the constructions of symptoms in psychosis. His work has been presented at various international and national conferences, including the Colloque International Brazil, France, the Psychoanalysis, the International Congress on Psychoanalysis and its Connection, and the Lacano-American Congress of Psychoanalysis. Please welcome Professor Marcelo Muniz.
Oh, okay. First, I would like to say that I'm honored to be invited to this panel. It's a great honor, and we now face the passing of Professor Dussel, who is it's a great loss for us, not in the world, for the left, for the Marxists, and of course for Latin America. Was an old militant, a great warrior, you know? So it's important. But of course, his legacy is there, a very big work, more than 50 books, and you know, a great life. And I would start to say, I don't want to go exactly through the work of Professor Dussel. I would like to make a little comment about the moment we live today in the world, and how is it so useful, so important, his work to understand what's happening now in geopolitical terms, and how his thoughts can be now, can realize itself, you know? It's important to say that in Brazil, Professor Dussel was not so much known, so much comment. I don't know exactly why this. His work is so commented, so well known in the Hispanic countries, but not so much in Brazil. No, when the day of his death, I didn't find comments. Of course, in the mainstream media, we don't find, but this is not surprise. But even in the alternative media in Brazil, it was difficult to find some articles talking about his passing. No, I found this in few medias. I found this in Unicinos media, that is the university from the south of Brazil, which is very linked to the theology of liberation, so we can understand, and few more comments. But I understand that Mr. Dussel, his work for me is very important, and I always think in his thoughts, I make a connection between Dussel's thoughts and Domenico Lossurdo work and thoughts. Domenico Lossurdo is a very important author for me, and I think that both, by different ways, are connected in the same struggle. Of course, both were important Marxists of the second part of the 20th century. But I see that Professor Dussel, he made a very strong critique of Eurocentrism, of colonialism, of modernity, from the perspective of Latin America continent. And at the same time, Lossurdo made within Europe the same kind of criticism, but as an auto-criticism. Lossurdo always he said that liberalism was always linked to colonialism. He has had a book about Euro-Marxism, and I see the same kind of reflection. Both Lossurdo and Mr. Dussel were able to see in Euro-Marxism and the left, the European left, this inability to see the other, the colonized. It was always, even for the Marxists, was a Marxist unable to understand the concept of imperialism. It's very hard for an European thinker to understand imperialism as we in the South America and Latin America, we can see very well and understand very well what is in our skin, in our flesh, imperialism. But for the European immersed in this Eurocentrism, it's very difficult. And this colonialism that is always alive, Lossurdo and Mr. Dussel, Professor Dussel, were always very strong in the criticism. And I'd like to say also this comment, Professor Dussel work in this exact moment where we live now. I'm sure that he was very awakened, very aware to the fact that today his work is really become realized. It started to be realized because we have now first moment, as long as I see, to really make the second, what Professor Dussel named the second emancipation. You are now starting to see this possibility of the second emancipation, because now we see that the hegemon, the imperial hegemon, the United States, is in extreme decadence now, and now we have this really starting to have this global South perspective that we didn't have before. In this term, we see how Professor Dussel was a real visionary. For decades, he was talking about the need to see we as Latin American, we need to see ourselves not as the not yet European, not yet developed country, not yet able to make the catch up with the developed country, but the important to see ourselves as the other of the colonizers, the other, and be able to dislocate this discourse, this colonizer discourse, and start to see us as real others, with historical roots, with a real perspective. And now I think we start to see this. I think that the war in Ukraine that started in 2022 was a crucial moment when, for me, it was very important that I saw for the first time that the European view is really different from the South, the global South view. And I think that that now we can understand what Professor Dussel was talking about. We need to develop our perspective. And exactly now we see that we have already a different perspective. And the European countries are now they are really a little perplexed to see that European view is not the universal perspective. When they start to make these packets of sanctions against Russia, we could hear them talking that, now Russia is isolated from the world. The world will sanction Russia, but suddenly European and the Western countries went to the sanction, but this global South not. So it was the concretization of Professor Dussel view that we are not the other in the sense, the colonizer sense, that the not yet being, are waiting for the catch up. No, we already have our perspective. And so since 2022, this is becoming clear that the South has a different perspective. And now I speak this for myself, my self-discovery also in this question, because of course everybody in Latin America is subordinated to this colonizer discourse, the settler discourse. And we usually, it's very hard to think ourselves from a different perspective. We have this way of thinking, this vocabulary that make us think as an almost European, and that, and now we perceive that, for example, the dissolution of socialism in Soviet Union, in Europe, was not like they usually talk, that was the world demise of socialism. We can understand that in Latin America, socialism has not found its end. We still have Cuba. Fidel Castro always said, no, the Soviet experience has finished, but the Cuban socialism has not ended. So we start to see little by little that we really have our own perspective. And I talked with European colleagues many times, and since the beginning of the war in Ukraine, and I can see very well that the difficulty that the Europeans have, the Western people have to understand what is imperialism. And so they talk sometimes for Russian's imperialism, but they don't understand what the first enemy of the global South, the real hegemon, that United States. No, so it's very interesting, and also I can see that this possibility of emancipation, that the second emancipation that about Professor Dussel always talked, become to be a real possibility now with the the power industry of China, this military power of Russia, and the BRICS, and little by little we can see that is the Western countries become isolated, and our perspective begin to really show itself. And I understand this as is the beginning of the construction of the transmodern approach, the transmodern perspective about which Professor Dussel always talks. Now we are beginning, and now with this, so he passed, Professor Dussel passed exactly the moment when his thoughts are becoming reality, and but also a moment where we live under fascism. We have this possibility, this exteriority in the totality of the Eurocentric view is really open like a breach. The global South can see through this breach. But of course, the struggles become fierce and fierce, and we can see now that we, at the same time, we live under fascism. The Europeans, the Western, usually speak to us that we are in the danger of fascism if the alt-right, the extreme right, come to power. But from the global South perspective, we understand that we are already under fascism. What we are seeing now in Europe, in the United States, is, frankly, this is fascism. Now they are normalizing Israel genocide. We see in the discourse in Gaza, we see the strange connection between colonial discourse that we think that was already dead, and the neo-colonial discourse. So at the same time, they speak about the Palestinians as, Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East, and the Arab countries are autocracies. This is the neo-colonial settler discourse. But we see at the same time the old settler discourse, when the Israeli minister called the Palestinians the human animals, like old 18th century. And Mr. Netanyahu speak like we are the civilization. This struggle is the struggle of civilization against barbarism. Is light against darkness. So it's a strange combination of these two discourses, but at the same time, we can see through this bridge that the order start to become order. The order start to become order, and I can really understand the accept that before. Professor Dussel talked about all the time that the importance to construct a new philosophy, a new epistemology, but it was very hard. I think most in Brazil, better. I think in Venezuela, in Bolivia, in Peru, I think maybe it's not so hard because they really have a strong indigenous people, parcel of this this people, this population, and we know that Bolivia is a pluriethnic nation today, but in Brazil, it's a little harder. I think we are more conservative here, and the indigenous people, for us, we remember them now when we talk about ecology. Now, when we talk about ecology, the need to preserve the Amazonia, then we remember we must listen here the indigenous people. They know something about how to preserve nature, no? But you don't have this strong presence that you have in Ecuador and Bolivia of this indigenous perspective that Professor Dussel always celebrate and think that this is what we are, no? We are not something that started in one with the discovery of America. So for Brazil, it's difficult, but I think we are starting to see. And I can remember, for example, also only to finish, that in 2003, when United States invaded Iraq, I watched this war in television, and all that I saw, it was the Operation Tempest in the Desert. We call here Tempestade no Deserto. It's all the American, the Western perspective that we saw this bomb through the night, this light through the night, and all the war we didn't see anything about the Iraqis. I know that almost 1 million Iraqis have died in this war, but we didn't see. But now in the Palestinian and Israeli war in Gaza, with the social media, we really can see the war, and we really can see the perspective of the Palestinians. And I know, I'm sure that we are all shocked with this massacre, this image of children being killed, and I see this as this possibility now that we have what Professor Dussel talked. It's okay. I will finish. So we start to have. I understand what he is speaking about. This Levinasian face-to-face encounter with the other. And I can understand that in 2003 war in Iraq, it was impossible to have this face-to-face because, of course, we never saw the Iraqi view. But now with social media, we have a kind of face-to-face encounter with the Palestinians, and we really can see his view of the war, and we can feel, and you are realizing now exactly that the world is turned against United States and Israel about this massacre, and of course the Western are very surprised and perplexed with this new position. They are becoming isolated. Okay, I will stop here. I didn't want to really go through the work of Professor Dussel. I knew that this would be better made by other persons. And so I would like to say that I'm happy now that he's not more unhappy. He's not more with us, but his legacy is now very active, helping us to see in a different way the world. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Muniz, for providing us with a rather comprehensive perspective of what is left with the life and work as we are seeing the signs of our contemporary times. It is really interesting how you highlight the realization of the global South into developing their own perspective rather than importing the truth from the European countries and so on. So I wonder if someone from the audience would like to highlight this especially from the theological point of view and religious studies and so on. But we need to move forward to the fourth presenter. Let's see if we have Mr. Yes, now let me invite Reverend Heber to introduce our fourth speaker. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Daniel. Our next distinguished speaker, Ferry Hidayat, has made significant contributions to various fields through his extensive research and insightful publications, with an impressive background in philosophy and linguistics. His notable works include Pengantar Filsafat Kebudayaan, 2021, Meta Science, Ilmu Mencipta Sains Baru, 2020, and Pancasila, Perspektif Pendiri RI dan Problematikanya, 2017, to name a few. Ferry has also published a series of articles in reputable journals, such as Humanities and Social Sciences Reviews and Prajna Vihara, Journal of Philosophy and Religion. Ferry Hidayat has presented his research at various prestigious international conferences, including the Eurasian Conference and the Polish Congress of Philosophy, solidifying his positions as a thought leader in the realms of philosophy and linguistics. So great to have you on board, Mr. Ferry.
Thank you very much for inviting me in this great occasion. First of all, I would like to express my great condolences to the family of the late Professor Enrique Dussel. Who has been left by his passing. It was really shocking, especially for me and also for many friends in Indonesia who has already read his works. And actually, we really hoped that Professor Dussel age would be longer, but then something happened and we couldn't avoid. We only can express great condolences, and I hope the family who has been left will have the great patience and also great consolation, because the late Professor Dussel, even though he has left us, but he left many works and also he left many books which inspire especially the philosophers outside the Western world. And so in this occasion, I would be happy to share my knowledge and also share my research on Enrique Dussel, especially what he wrote about Indonesia in some of his books. In this occasion, I would like to elaborate what is Indonesia in Enrique Dussel's eyes and what Indonesian philosophers saw him. I would like to ask for permission if I can share my PowerPoint slides. Okay, to begin with, while waiting for the slideshow to be shown by Pak Edward. Here I have to acknowledge that Professor Dussel's knowledge about Indonesia is very, very broad. It is shown in 4 of his books. Yeah, at least in this occasion, I only show 4 of his books that mention the Indonesia specifically and also indirectly. First of all, I would like to mention Enrique Dussel's book entitled Beyond Philosophy, Ethics, History, Marxism, and Liberation Theology. In this book, Indonesia, the word Indonesia and Sukarno are mentioned in the context of national capitalism, or Enrique Dussel called populism. In this book, Enrique Dussel explained that the national capitalism in the third world had been destroyed by the North American capitalism, especially in the early of the 20th century. In this book, for example, Enrique Dussel mentioned Vargas committed suicide in Brazil in 1955. Perón fell in Argentina. Rojas Pinilla fell in Colombia. And then he mentioned also Nasser in Egypt and Sukarno in Indonesia. These leaders of the third world have been mentioned only to give example that. Thank you very much. Okay, would you like to go to the second slide, please? Okay, this one, thank you. So in this book, Sukarno from Indonesia has been mentioned, juxtaposed by other leaders of the third world, only to give examples that they are the leader of the countries. The capitalism in the countries, the countries of the third world, were destroyed by the North American capitalism. When they want to make their nation states strong, especially in terms of economics, then the North American capitalism destroyed the endeavors of the peripheral national capitalism. Here, Dussel shows his knowledge, a broad knowledge, especially about the third world leaders, especially also in Indonesia and also in Egypt. In here, his knowledge is not only in Latin American countries, but also in Middle East and also in Southeast Asia, including Indonesia. And then in the second book, the next slide, we have 20 theses on politics. In here, Professor Dussel also mentioned about Indonesia, but in another context. He mentioned again here Sukarno and also Indonesia in the context of hegemonic action. When he explained about the hegemonic action as fully delegated exercise of power, and it relies on consensus, fraternity, and the people as the foundation of power, he gave example of the hegemonic action in 20th century Latin America, and the hegemonic action had been applied by leaders like Vargas in Brazil, Cardenas in Mexico, Perón in Argentina, and also Dussel mentioned Jacobo Arbenz and Castillo Armas, and together with Sukarno and Nasser in Egypt. But the context here is different from the first book that I explained. The context here is when, especially in Indonesia, when there was a coup d'etat against Sukarno, Dussel call it hegemonic action. So it is the hegemonic action by the national power. In this context, it is Suharto presidency regime. He did hegemonic action, and then to make a coup d'etat against Sukarno in Indonesia. Here again, it shows that the knowledge about Indonesian politics, Asian politics, and also Middle East politics of Enrique Dussel is really broad. And then next slide, we have another book, The Underside of Modernity, Appel, Ricoeur, Rorty, Taylor, and the Philosophy of Liberation. In here, Sukarno is also mentioned, and Indonesia also mentioned. But the context is different. The context here, Enrique Dussel explained about the process of the development of the nation. Yeah, if you see the slide, especially when Dussel wrote about Indonesia and mentioned Indonesia here, Dussel began by saying that in Indonesia there was a Dutch merchant. It was in the colonial period, and then the European had been colonizing Indonesia, and then here the colonial period is followed by the neo-colonial, especially here Dussel mentioned Latin America approximately since 1810, and later on the modernizing and industrializing process initiated by the peripheral populism. Again here, Dussel mentioned Vargas in Brazil, mentioned Peron in Argentina, Nasser in Egypt, and Sukarno in Indonesia. Only to give example of the leaders of the third world who applied what Dussel called populism. In the next slide, we have another book. The book is called The Invention of the Americas, Eclipse of the Other and the Myths of Modernity. In this book, Dussel show the great Neolithic cultures and areas of contacts of the West toward the East. What is very interesting here, especially in his book, Dussel shows that Indonesia, Proto-Indonesian, whose culture Dussel said cultures of Pacific Ocean, the culture of Pacific Ocean, including Proto-Indonesian, they have great Neolithic culture together with the Mesopotamic Egyptian, and then India and China, and also at the same time Aztec, Maya, Inca, Chibcha, in Latin America. So it is very enlightening because the book reveals that especially we Indonesian had just known that our culture, especially the Proto-Indonesian, also according to Dussel, had a great Neolithic culture, together with the Aztec, Maya, Inca, Chibcha in Latin America. And it is very enlightening because the global North will not admit and will not recognize that the Indonesia, especially the Proto-Indonesian, have a great Neolithic culture. And yeah, as you see in the slide, that the Proto-Indonesia or a Proto-Polynesian, Java and other Indonesian island in southern China, they had a great Neolithic cultures, and also there is an interesting fact here because according to Dussel, the language of the Latin American old culture, like in you see here in sorry, if you see here in wait a minute, Polynesian and Quechua, an Incan language, they have similarities, like carry in Incan language, auki in the medium, in Incan language waka or huaca, eat in Incan language kamu or kamui, and then old in Incan language auki, warrior in Incan language inga, and strong in Incan language buhara or pukara. So Dussel shows the similarity of the language of the Polynesian and Quechua, which yeah, I think it is a very revelatory, because Indonesian themselves they don't know the similarities until Professor Dussel shows in his book. Now I would like to do the reverse. How Indonesian philosophers wrote. I mean, what Indonesian philosophers wrote about Enrique Dussel. Since 2005 up to date, there have been scientific papers which elaborate on the works and the thought of Professor Dussel. Yeah, according to my study, the study that I had done, there have been 25 works from 2005 until 2023. For example, yeah, I would like to give example from my own book, Pengantar Teori-Teori Filsafat, or in English, Introduction to Philosophical Theories. I always refer to this Enrique Dussel's writing, especially in Prajna Vihara, Journal of Philosophy and Religion. In this article entitled New Age in the History of Philosophy, the Word Dialogue Between Philosophical Tradition, written by Enrique Dussel, I quote what he thought about Eurocentrism. So what the problem of the philosophy learning is Eurocentrism, and Enrique Dussel explained that all philosophers from non-Western tradition must have bravery and courage to do the philosophy according to his tradition, because what we understand as Western philosophy is actually not universal, but particular as our local wisdom, Indonesian philosophy. And then we also got inspiration from his greatest work entitled Philosophy of Liberation. Yeah, I quote very much from this work in my book, and I emphasize that the task of philosopher is not only revealing the truths, and also thinking about the truths, and also reflecting on the truths, but also doing the liberation. Okay, and then next. All right. This is also the work of Indonesian writer. In this work, the Indonesian writer elaborates on the content of the book written by Enrique Dussel entitled The Ethic of Liberation. And finally, there is one important work in the next slide. There is a very good book about doing theology in Indonesia, and this book got inspiration from the work written by Enrique Dussel in this book called The Colonial Christianities. I think, okay, what is the conclusion? Okay, why studying on Dussel is very important. Dussel is a representative of the Latin Americans, and Latin Americans are people of suffering, people of oppression, people of injustice and of poverty. Yet they are endowed with active awakening and richly analytic mind, and they are blessed with watchful, cautious, critical, introspective, and attentively observant eyes, and they are bestowed with a burning, intuitive, compassionate, brave, unshaking, and celestial heart. So from their questioning mind was born philosophy of liberation. From their interrogative eyes emerge sciences of liberation, and their enduring, God-fearing, and purified heart give birth to both theology and spirituality of liberation. A peculiar assemblage of their liberation philosophy, liberation theology, liberation spirituality, and liberation science constitute what I call a culture of liberation. This culture of liberation played the role of the Southern David, burned to slay and to kill the Goliaths, the hegemonic North Atlantic culture of domination. So with his theology of liberation, he trusts Goliath's theology of developmentalism, and of conformist secularization of the center, of the dictatorial regimes of capitalist countries, and of transnational capitalist neocolonialism. So with his philosophy of liberation, he hurled heavy stone at Goliath's ontology and philosophy of domination, philosophy of a dominating subjectivity, and what Enrique Dussel said, philosophy of the metropoles and of white European males. So what South Asian must learn from Latin American is the culture of liberation. And another thing, why is Latin American liberation philosophy, like what Enrique Dussel taught, is very important for us Indonesian? The first reason is from the Latin American came brave figures who were not at all afraid of the dangers and disaster because of the truth of the principle they believe in. So they challenged the status quo of theological colonialism, philosophical colonialism, and spiritual colonialism, and established scientific colonialism, which the North, global North, had launched against and over Latin American countries. So they are brave, and they are, according to Walter Mignolo term, they are epistemologically disobedient. And I think for us, the philosophers in the third world countries, including Indonesia, have to make use of all the argumentation and also a very good insight from Enrique Dussel. So even though Enrique Dussel passed away, but his works, his philosophical insight had inspired all the philosophers of the world, including Indonesia. Thank you very much. I think that's all what I can deliver.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ferry. I wouldn't add anything because it covers a lot of literature reading. We can see that you are a really strict reader of Dussel. So we hope we have more time for conversation about this, but unfortunately we need to move forward. Thank you so much for your material. Now I'd like to invite Reverend Heber to introduce our speaker, Professor Prasenjit.
Thank you, Mr. Daniel. Prasenjit Biswas, or Professor Biswas, is a professor of philosophy at M.Hum Shillong since 2011. His specializations are phenomenology and continental philosophy, philosophy of science, philosophy of Northeast Indian communities and tribes, contemporary Indian philosophy, consciousness studies, etc. Besides, he is an independent political theorist and analyst cum commentator. He taught philosophy at IIT Dhanbad, IIT Bombay, IIT Guwahati, Assam University as his previous assignments. He has visited with academic assignments at Cambridge University, TISS Mumbai, GNU, Rabindra Bahari University, Paderborn University, Copenhagen University, University of Western Australia, University of Tartu, etc. A widely read and traveled scholar, he looks after newly created Office of International Affairs at M.Hum Shillong. He is recipient of Keith Leon Residential Scholarship at Wayne State University, USA, and got doctoral Jawaharlal Nehru Memorial Scholarship of Government of India. His published books include Ethics Life Words in Northeast India, 2008, The Postmodern Controversy, 2005, Between Philosophy and Anthropology, 2017, etc. His current manuscripts are Aporias of Social Theory, 2023, and Northeast India, Politics, Philosophy, and India, at 75 years. He has guided 10 doctoral theses in philosophy. His presence interest spans through technology and non-philosophy, Theophilos, Ramant, Biswas, and Anushilon Samiti. Everyone, please welcome Professor Biswas.
Yeah, good evening to everybody, especially to Daniel and to my dear friend Heber, Reverend Heber, whom we have met. Now we do not have much time to discuss little more on Enrique Dussel, and I won't discuss much, but I will point to one or two things that are relevant. But before that, I can express my thanks to Professor Abed Konor. It is his initiative for which we got our important speakers today. I can see him here. I can see my friend Dr. Alok Tandon. I can see Dr. Wesley Bishop. I can see Dr. Piabut. I can see Dr. Upendra. I can see Sumita, Dr. Dandar, Dr. Banbalang, and some other of my research scholars and friends. Now, of course, ideally, we should have a discussion on the floor. But before we discuss in the floor, I would just flag one or two issues. One of the issues that Enrique Dussel actually focuses on is the nature of political power, whether power is something that is obediential, that one has to obey power, to which Professor Hidayat very nicely mentioned, Walter Magnolus, the notion of disobedient epistemology. Epistemologically, we question the dominance, the authority in terms of moral legitimacy, in terms of ethical interrogation of the way the power operates, and the historical way in which power operated across the globe, according to Dussel, is a move from coloniality to decoloniality. And decoloniality signifies a certain sense of liberation, liberation of the soul from the body and the mind. The body and the minds can be colonized, but the soul cannot be colonized. And this is something very theological that Dussel had spoken about. And soul always has this immense potential to resist the potestas or the institutional power, which is negatively fetishized in the form of certain individuals, certain states wielding power. So the wielders of power are resisted by an inherent capacity of the soul. And this is what needs to be recovered in today's time in terms of our decolonial praxis. And the decolonial praxis fundamentally would mean for Enrico Dussel is a certain attempt to de-westernize, de-totalize, de-objectify, and to practice a certain kind of alterity, a certain kind of an alternative. In terms of Indian philosophers like Gandhi and Krishna Chandra Bhattacharya, we talk about Swaraj, or the liberation of the self, or liberation of the soul. So the decolonial articulation is somewhat globally similar, that everyone is talking about liberation of the soul and the self from the metrics of power. And this is something common across the decolonial thinkers. The other thing that is arising from Enrico Dussel, is the will to live, as he calls it. Will to live is a will that takes one out of vulnerabilities by making one conscious about the vulnerability and precarity of life, which is expressed in multiple forms of domination and oppression. So one has to come out of the vulnerabilities. And in order to come out of the vulnerabilities, one has to pose an alternative form of articulation, which is expressive, creative, and which is poetic. If I borrow this metaphor of poesis from Enrico Dussel, he is talking of poetry in a disenchanted world. So a kind of poetic resistance, a kind of poetic justice is possible. And at this point of time, what all of us have done here, starting with Edward, who is the main organizer here. I'm getting back to organization of this, Edward the Simamora, and also Reverend Heber and their group. We wanted to create a platform of this kind of a critical dialogue. And today, in a very scintillating manner, a dialogue between South and South has been created. South from the Western point of view, West from the point of view of South, and also the view of South from Indonesia or from India, a bottom-up perspective. So we have these multiple perspectives that had to be brought together. And very interestingly, with the occasion of sudden demise of our teacher, very dear Enrique Dussel, for whom our heart cries, and we wander all alone, and we express our prayers, and we shed our tears in our aloneness, in the moment of missing Enrique Dussel, with a deep sense of grief and mourning, that at this moment, that we are able to celebrate his life, not in death, but life in his will to live. And that will to live is better expressed in the form of our continental and transcontinental dialogue that we have just organized. So therefore, me and Daniel Edward has come to an agreement that we can name our initiative as Transcritique, following French philosopher François Laruelle, who thinks that Transcritique is a way of overcoming the dualities and binaries, the binaries and dualities that are created by the existing situation or the existential angst through which the individual and the collectives are undergoing at this moment. So we have to overcome and transcend that kind of an angst, and that is possible if we have a global view of critique, which is critical hermeneutic, critically understanding how meanings are circulated, as Enrique Dussel had done by critiquing the dominant and by validating what he calls as counter-hegemonic. So we have to validate a counter perspective. We have to validate a plural counter perspective. It cannot be one perspective. Multiple plural counter perspectives are to be validated, which Laruelle called as Transcritique. So we thought that we should call ourselves as Transcritique and develop this dialogue in the form of probably having a volume of collected essays from these presentations and from our august audience, that we produce a volume on Enrique Dussel from the perspective of the South, from the perspective of all of us that we are participating in this dialogue. I thank once again and express my gratitude to everyone and invite Edward to throw the floor open so that speakers can answer, but very briefly question-answer session has to be conducted. Edward, please, you take over from here. Reverend Heber, you can also take over. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Professor Biswas. Without further ado, I'd like to open the opportunity for the responders. I can see that Mr. Laxmana is here. If you can hear me, please, you can open your mic and then start your question to either of the presenters.
Right. Thank you, Edward. So, hi everyone. My name is Laxmana. I'm actually Indonesian, but currently I'm studying in the United States, New Jersey. So this is interesting conversations, and also in the opportunity to remember Enrique Dussel. Honestly, Enrique Dussel, I'm not quite familiar, but from these conversations, I pretty amazed about his works and how the connections between the fellow sufferers in this global South context. And I want to ask more with Dr. Luis Andrade, if any chance, could you more tell me more, emphasize about the transmodernity, the connections of the theology, because you mentioned that liberations in philosophy that Dussel coined in 1976 is sharing context with the theology of liberations. And if you don't mind, could you please maybe make a connections with the decolonial theory that you were mentioned, where Dussel is really influenced with the decolonial perspective with the Fanon and Mignolo. Thank you.
Hi, Leonard. Nice to meet you. Well, it's an interesting question, but for to answer, I think it is not possible in 5 minutes. I will try. I will try to answer you in 1 minute. I know, because we don't have time, but only for you to show you that this subject is really deeply. Why? Because usually, for example, unfortunately, the work of by Enrique Dussel was not translated into English, into French, neither 4 books, maybe, no? But he wrote more of the 40 books in Spanish. So the Enrique Dussel's words, as my previous, that the previous speaker showed us, he speak on history, no? He proposed a new historical narrative. He worked on theology, political theology, philosophy, ethics, you know? So it's really, really various the fields that Enrique Dussel was working. But for example, we cannot forget that Enrique Dussel began with the liberation theologians in the 17th. So Enrique Dussel was working, his first works on history was a new history of the Catholic Church in Latin America from above the communities, and even he said that he began to understand another kind of history working of the Catholic Church in Latin America, because he can to understand the role, for example, played by Bartolomé de las Casas. For Enrique Dussel, Bartolomé de las Casas is one of the beginner of the critics of modernity. No, in the books, in his book Ethics of Liberation, he tried to put this perspective. Gines de Sepúlveda, Aristotelian theologian, who justify the conquest of Americas, and Bartolomé de las Casas to criticize this notion of colonization, evangelization. So Enrique Dussel studied the role of this priest against the Spanish power, and after he tried to propose a new contemporary history, no, talking of the non-Western population. Now Professor Hidayat talk about the Indonesian reception of Enrique Dussel words, no, of the Enrique Dussel ideas. So the idea of transmodernity for Dussel is to try to put in the same level the not Western cultures, and to recognize the apports by Ottoman culture, Muslim culture, African culture. You know, this non-Western culture was unfortunately was denied by the Eurocentrism. So for Dussel, transmodernity implies, first of all, to propose an anti-hegemonic, an anti-capitalist, an anti-imperialist locus or narrative. So yes, his idea of transmodernity is to go beyond of modernity, because for Dussel, modernity is a new era where we are living with a new forms or kinds of domination. So transmodernity try to go beyond of capitalist logic. And yeah, that is the idea of transmodernity. Of course, we can to understand this idea of transmodernity in some of Latin American thinkers. For example, our colleague from Brazil talk about the reception in Dussel in Brazil. And for example, John Monson, an important Brazilian theologian, or another in Brazil, is an interesting theologian, Brazilian theologian, who work on this idea of Dussel, even Leonardo Boff, for example, Leonardo Boff in Brazil. So yes, there are contemporary Brazilian theologians, and even, of course, in other countries, who try to reflect on transmodernity. Well, I try to yeah.
Thank you, Luis. It's really helpful. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Professor Luis and Mr. Lasmana, for your question and feedback.
Yeah. Can I ask a question? Hello?
Yes, Upendra. This is Upendra. You can ask. Yeah, please, Upendra.
Yeah, this is actually a way of remark and a small query to Professor Prasenjit Biswas. I'm thankful to him because he introduced this philosopher a few days back. And because I do my research in political philosophy, and I thought, and I felt there's a lot of relevance to these ideas, because I work on the ideas of violence and justice, freedom, and equality. Especially, of course, I'm a bit caught with Western philosophy, but with the coming of the ideas like global South, etc., I have a a kind of a curiosity about anxiety regarding all these ideas, because we're talking about decoloniality, we're talking about relocating these ideas in a different zones of philosophizing. So, but when we are being suspectful of something called as the Western philosophical paradigm, so we are talking about indigenities, and in the context of Enrique Dussel, it is Latin America. But I think, do you think it is advisable? Of course, if we extend the focus to Africa, because if you read and listen to the lectures of Lumumba, which I recently started listening to his ideas, and which is very much relevant to basically the ideas which we are talking about, and especially in the context of India. The last speaker was referring to how it is relevant to Indonesia. In fact, the idea, I have just read the book 20 Theses on Politics, which I felt is very mesmerizing, in fact, very relevant to the work which I am concerned with these days. So, how do we deal with this? Because I was reading a book by one of the French thinkers. I think he wrote a very popular but funnier book called Tyranny of the Guilt by Pascal Bruckner, where he talks about, because basically the self-criticism is only the trait of, again, the Western world. So because when we are talking about philosophy outside of Western philosophy, or Western world itself, and we're talking about Latin America, we're talking about Africa, and we're talking about South Asia, etc.
Upendra, I think I'm able to guess your question,
Yes.
Sorry to stop you, because there will be other in the floor. So let me briefly answer to what you were trying to say. In fact, there is always an alternative that is possible, a kind of an alternative sense of legitimacy, a kind of an alternative ethical position in response to, whatever one wants to respond to. Maybe one wants to respond from the position of being in the South and being embedded into a politics of resistance in the South. So this politics of resistance and politics of knowing the other would go together in order to work out an alternative ethical position. That's what Dussel has been doing. And he incorporated India so much and also expanded this notion of indigeneity by picking up identities which are situated in a certain kind of a struggle with the dominant power, So this frame is available across the world in Dussel's writing, 20 theses in politics. Similar theses can be worked out in the case of India. Because of time constraint, we won't be able to talk much. We'll continue this discussion maybe next week when we meet. Thank you, Upendra. Okay. Again, I go to Edward. Please, you carry on. Edward, please.
Thank you, Professor Upendra and Professor Biswas. I believe it's a good spark of conversation, but unfortunately we don't have time for follow-up questions. Now I'd like to invite do we have Dr. Wesley Bishop? Dr. Wesley Bishop.
Yes. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you.
Sorry, my camera has been giving me trouble. This is wonderful, and I want to thank you, Professor Biswas, for inviting me today. I am not as familiar with his work until you had introduced him to me. But what I find really interesting for this panel, as we discuss issues of the Global South and identity, and indigenous culture and indigenous identity, is how do we move towards thinking about identity in terms of the subaltern that is not simply fixed. That, so for example, in the American South, after you have indigenous people removed from lands, and then people, settler colonials of different varieties, either enslaved people or colonists, move in, how do we then move about in this question of indigeneity? And I think this is very pertinent. We're seeing this currently with Israel's invasion of Gaza and the displacement of Palestinian people, where you have Israelis, particularly Zionists, who are arguing that they are indigenous to this land because of an idea of identity that is historically based, that is religiously based, largely religiously based. And so my question, I guess, to everyone and to all of you, right, is to think about is how do we actually stack these indigenous claims in terms of who has claim over the land? Personally, I would say people like, yes, the Palestinians obviously have more claim to Gaza, but we see literally here a debate and a fight over who is more indigenous and therefore who has more validity, right, towards land rights.
I think I'll briefly respond to it, Professor Bishop. Actually, indigeneity is a multi-site, multi-criteria kind of a concept. Land is one of it. The other important thing is this transition to a kind of a cultural indigeneity, from economic indigeneity via social indigeneity to cultural indigeneity. Now, cultural indigeneity occupies the larger symbolic space within the capitalist order. And as it is occupying a larger symbolic space, correspondingly, it requires a little more material space towards which it tries to create an elbow room for itself. So there is this internal struggle of capturing the space or extending the space in terms of moral legitimacy, not just in terms of economic and political rights, but in terms of moral legitimacy that has to be derived from a certain kind of historical discourse, which will set in motion a certain kind of a conflict and ways to come out of that conflict. And Enrique Dussel is advocating the possibility of liberation from these kind of conflicts, provided we take a certain route of expanding our sense of the self. I mean, to put it very briefly, in that, land would come in the form of a new discourse of right, which needs to be legitimated within a certain social and political order at this point of time. I thank you very much for attending as well, Dr. Bishop. Yeah. Yeah, Dr.
Could I say a little words also about this question?
Yes, please. Yes, please. Yeah.
Well, yes, this is a good question, Professor Bishop. I want you to speak that, okay, if you discuss this question in religions terms, it can be legitimate. There is a religious reason to the Jews to be there. Of course, is historical, religious. By other way, they were out of this land from 2,000 years. This is a little complicated also. I think about what if we do the same in Brazil, for example. The Brazil were totally owned by the indigenous 500 years ago. They could simply require their land back. It's a little complicated, but I think the most important question is that I think it maybe inspired by Professor Dussel thoughts. Both requirements are legitimate, Palestinian and in religious and moral terms, but we must understand that the project of Israel, there's a lot of problem in this project, because it's not, this project, as I see, is not legitimate, because this is a project from the British Empire, a project from the British Empire, and it was obvious with imperial, colonizer, settler mind to divide and conquer, divide and rule the Arab, to avoid the Arab countries to unite, to make a strong, big country with a lot of material wealth and political maybe strength, and so since the beginning of Israel, this was a settler colonial project, and as I see in Professor Dussel view, this is not a legitimate project in this way, because it's all that Professor Dussel criticizes, this idea of domination, to annihilate the order, to never give place to the order. All these problems were from the beginning in the DNA of this project. But maybe if we could eliminate this project and begin a new Israel, I think that every Palestinian will not refuse to live together with, but many things would be transformed, in order to realize this possibility. Okay.
Thanks, Professor Marcelo. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Marcelo and Professor Bishop. Now it's time for us to listen to the last responder. Mr. Lutfi, if you can hear me, you can open your mic.
All right, thank you. Mr. Edward, am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Lutfi. I'm a undergrad student from Gadjah University in Indonesia. And I'm a beginning reader of Enrique Dussel, and this panel has helped me a lot in understanding many of his ideas. I would like to specifically ask about how we use the term Global South exactly, because this term we use, it has been circulating a lot. We have been using it in some kind of providing an alternative to Global North, which have been dominating. But how should we navigate of using the term? Because in using the term, we it seems like we have to imagine a new totality of another totality of specific cultures, which are, I think, in Dussel's idea, should be all separate, all should be alternative to each other. But if we keep using Global South, wouldn't it be making another totality? And would it be just another, should we see it as a strategy for making a contra-hegemonic efforts, or how do we navigate this idea of like the tension between totality and alterity? Thank you for the panelists.
I think I take this question, Lutfi. It's a great question, in fact. But as we say in literature, just to briefly refer to you, is that, South, the idea of Global South, has different and independent origins, It's a consequence of uneven development. And therefore, it has this different and independent origins. It's not just a counter-hegemonic strategy, but it's also a departure, from the developed world. In Dussel's language, it's the other of development, the other of domination. And it's not a closed totality. There is a totalization, a reverse totalization in the idea of Global South, but it's not a closed totality. It's an open totality that can include Latin America and Indonesia together, as Professor Hidayat was mentioning, and it can combine a large number of unrepresented locales together and can build up a certain kind of a connection between them in terms of a epistemic disobedient strategy. So you can construct a Global South based on these consequences of uneven development. This is to Lutfi, but certainly not to Professor Marcelo. That we need to discuss in the longer details. But just to Lutfi, to set the background of the question that he has in his mind, as you see. Yeah. Anything else if Professor Marcelo wants to add? Yeah, please.
No, yes, I think it's very important, your remark that this idea of Global South is an open totality. And this is, you must have this in mind. This is because I think transmodernity is not, is against postmodernity. You are not, when you think in transmodern terms, you are not concerned to avoid totalities, like the postmodern idea is again this meta-narrative, you cannot have this is authoritarianism, we don't have this problem because transmodernity is against postmodernism. I am sure that Professor Dussel was not friend of postmodern ideology. Because, of course, on the contrary, postmodernism is an extreme individualist, particularist way of thinking, and all his thought was to combat this particularism, this individualism, and he always talked that we are communitary. No, we are not, never were individuals. So we are not against totalities, but the closed totalities that are pseudo universalities, like modernity brought pseudo universalities, the closed totalities, as Professor was talking. So it's open totalities are no problem. We must deal with open totalities in order to overcome capitalism. We cannot stay in celebrating particularity, because if you celebrate only particularities, we never overcome capitalism. We need to think in totality terms. Okay.
That was very insightful. Thank you, professors.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lutfi and Marcelo. As we're moving towards the end of this discussion, I'd like to give the application to the floor in case anyone from the listener would like to say something before we conclude this discussion. Very briefly. Yes, I can hear people 19 something. Can you state your name?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, my name is Mark. Yeah, actually, network connection is very good, so maybe I want to come in a video.
Your voice is not becoming clear. Yeah, your voice is not getting clear. Please, can you clarify?
Oh, okay, okay. This is Manoj, sir. Can you hear
Oh,
me?
yeah. I can hear you now. Yeah, I can hear you now. Please go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for this illuminating meeting on Enrique Dussel. And I just wanted to submit my thought on this. And after listening to all of you without taking anyone's name specially, since I am from northeastern part of India, I want to submit that this type of poetic justice, you talked about it, through decolonized power that can touch the alterity of metaphysical exteriority. The first speaker talked on that as a form of new epistemology, what we need at present. That is my submission, sir. Thank you. If you could hear me.
Yes. Dr. Manoj, you are on the right track. But the only thing is that it has to be combined with other such exteriorities. And we have to break the chain of hermeneutic circle, if you have heard of me. Okay? Hello?
Yes.
Manoj,
yes.
could you hear me?
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. It's okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Edward, we can now go back to the last part of our ritual. Who will give the thanks? You can offer the question. Yeah, please. Okay. Yeah, before. Yeah. Please. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Sure.
Before I start, I would like to thank everyone. I'm hearing for the first time about Enrique Dussel. There's a saying which says that a philosopher is not accepted when he's alive, but his works are widely accepted when he passed away. So my thankfulness to all the panelists. So the question is, how does Dussel engage with the idea of philosophical interculturality, and what implications does it have for the dialogue between various different cultural philosophies? That's the question.
Yes. Manbha, I'm taking the question. Can you hear me? Sorry.
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, you can hear me. Okay, so this intercultural aspect is understood in terms of convergence and difference by Dussel. And Dussel is emphasizing on difference, how difference is to be understood. Difference has to be understood in terms of identifying how one is situated in a certain political, moral, economic, and all other contexts. So you have to contextually understand the nature of difference. Once you have understood the nature of difference between, let's say, two cultures A and B, it is possible to build bridges between them in terms of finding certain historical similarities. So you move from culture to history in Dussel's framework of liberation. I can elaborate more on that, but right now there is no time, but that's the clue I leave with you. You can follow up on ethics of liberation of Dussel.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay. So, Edward, please.
Can I add a little more?
Please. We are most welcome. Please.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if we see the figure of Enrique Dussel himself, actually he has a very good attention on a different culture and different philosophies. He is very good at reading the Chinese philosophy. He mentioned many Chinese philosophers, and he understood very well
and also African philosophers, and also Indian philosophers. So I will recommend one journal article in my slideshow in Prajna Vihara Journal of Philosophy, published in Thailand. It is New History of Philosophy. The title is A New History of Philosophy. And it is a call to inter-philosophical dialogue between South and South, North and South, and also South and North, global South and global North. So I think we can learn from Enrique Dussel himself that if we want to do the intercultural philosophical dialogue, we have to have a very good attention, pay attention, and understand very well the philosophical tradition of the certain country that we are going to understand. I think that's all.
Yeah, thank you, Professor.
I thank Professor. Yeah, I thank Professor Hidayat very much. I hope we will have a later project of publishing together, Professor Hidayat, and we will deal with those issues. Okay, Daniel, you can take over now.
Yes, I believe it's a really good spark of a longer conversation that we are doing. The time has passed 2.5 hours, but there are still 30 participants going strong in this room. We do really appreciate your participations, everyone, especially the presenters. Professor Luis, thank you so much for coming, for accepting our invitation. Professor Muniz, Mr. Hidayat, Professor Prasenjit, and Ms. Carmen excused herself because of some responsibilities, so she needed to leave earlier than everyone. So we have gone through a lot of an effort to develop a comprehensive perspective towards reflecting on and celebrating the life of Dussel, and then it even ends on a call to action. I really appreciate the initiative by Professor Biswas, which we will hear at the conclusion of this discussion. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Professor Biswas to conclude our discussion. So now with your closing remarks.
Yes, yes. Daniel, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, okay, sure. I want to profusely thank my panelists here who have taken their time out from a very busy schedule. Although I could not give much time in inviting them, I once again thank Professor Abed Kanur for connecting us to Professor Louis Martínez Andrade, who is a French translator of Professor Enrique Dussel. Indeed, Professor Andrade has enlightened us to many of the salient aspects of Dussel's corpus of writing, for which we are extremely grateful. And we look forward to a longer collaboration because we want to have a Dussel series of lectures and maybe a kind of a volume from our side of Transcritique by collaborating between Professor Hidayat, me, Edward, and everyone else. I also thank Carmen, Irene, González, for taking time out because she is such an engaged researcher and who has so much of research assignments at her hand, yet she gave us time and made a fascinating presentation. In absentia, I thank her profusely. I thank Professor Marcelo M. Freire, who is our old friend of Edward, me, and Reverend Heber, and he presented before us earlier. We are extremely thankful and happy to see your smiling face and your theoretical contributions and praxeological evidences that you have suggested to all of us. Well, I think we should carry out this discussion at a larger plane and address many of the contemporary issues which we couldn't address because of paucity of time. I once again thank Professor Ferry Hidayat for his extremely meaningful, extremely well worked out kind of a presentation. And we deeply apologize to you because we could not give you full time. It's our limitation. We really missed much of your other slides, which really contained much valuable, essential information that you have culled out of Enrique Dussel and connected it to Global South so well. I'm simply moved by your presentation and reminded of Dussel's commitment to Global South. Therefore, we have to get you amidst us, and probably we need to build this platform of Transcritique in terms of transmodernity, in terms of bringing Dussel and other decolonial thinkers together in our perspective. And we really need a longer collaboration. I thank you profusely for taking your time out. I have no words to thank Edward Daniel and Reverend Heber. Any word that I speak for them will be less than, the adequate. And I cannot come to the level of equal to the task in my words in thanking Edward Daniel, my very dear younger brother, I would say, and Reverend Heber, who is a guiding light for all of us. So I stop here. Thank you once again, and probably we'll go for another round, maybe physical conferencing, and also a few more online discussions where all our listener participants also will take part as participants, and they will speak up. We will create that space for everyone. With this hope, we restarted our broken enterprise, which Daniel and Reverend Heber started, in fact, 2 years back during COVID pandemic. And now we are reverting to it in a new name, in a new spirit, and with our grief and mourning for the loss of Professor Enrique Dussel. Probably that stimulates us a little bit to move forward and to create this platform at a larger level in terms of our publications and further research and further discussions. With these words, I profusely thank everyone, all my friends, my research scholars, my students, my colleagues, professors across the world for taking time out to make this Transcritique enterprise a very successful one this evening. I leave the floor to Edward again for giving his concluding words. Thanks, Edward, again.
Yeah, thank you, Professor. I think I've done most of the things that I plan to deliver is done already. So I think it's time for us to say goodbye to each other. But before, we need to take pictures as a closing ritual. Reverend Heber, can you guide us?
Okay, everyone, before we wrap up our discussion, let's take a group photo. Please, everyone, open up the camera and hold on as I will capture. So I will capture the moment. Okay, and smile. 1, 2. Okay, thank you.
So thank you, everyone. We have left.
Edward, are we going to get the recording soon? Please make an announcement because everyone wants to hear that. Yeah, please.
Yes, we are going to upload the video in the platform that we are yet to decide. I have left a phone number and an email in the comment box if you can find it. Then you can keep in touch with our team. Thank you.
In any case, I will remain in touch and coordinate for our Transcritique further, Edward. Okay?
Yes, thank you so much.
And once again, good night to everyone from Indian side and good morning in America and Europe and in Latin America. Have a nice day for everyone, for Edward and everybody. Yeah, sure. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.